I'm just impressed that so many people came out for my talk on thermodynamics. This is really this is great. The Gemara says that you have to start with a joke, and when it gets close to Purim, I get very unfunny. So first of all, welcome everybody. Just a couple of ground rules before we start. No throwing fruit or vegetables. That is not an aisle. Put your cell phones on vibrate or less. Or off even. Indulge. So my name is Rabbi Gavriel Goldfeder. I'm a proud member of the two organizations that are sponsoring this event this evening, of Soul Food and Chaver. Soul Food is Rabbi Josh Rose and myself. Culture, Community, Chaos is our tagline. And we like to offer events that stir questions about Jewish identity. And I'm also a member of Chaver, which is the Boulder's Rabbinic Fellowship, and this is almost the entirety of Chaver. We're missing a couple of rabbis who are not here tonight, but Chaver and Soul Food are two great organizations that stir and that are featuring dialogue, people being honest with each other. Boulder is one of the few communities in America where the rabbis actually talk to each other on a regular basis.
They kind of like each other.
And even like each other and invite each other over for things. So this is the kind of dialogue that we like to have, where we take an issue that's important to all of us and talk about it with each other, and like to give other people the opportunity to hear and participate in the conversation and also to ask questions. So we're looking forward to a good stirring dialogue. Last time we had a panel among the rabbis, it almost came to fisticuffs. So that's true. So that's actually a fact. So it was great. I thought it was amazing. I thought it was really a wonderful thing. So
what was the topic?
Well, the topic was intermarriage. So it was right, we'll see what happens with tonight. We'll try to find only the most controversial topics. So quick intro. Morah Yehdis Fishman is here. She's shares the spiritual leadership of Eish Kodesh with me. Rabbi Josh Rose from Har Hashem. Rabbi Jamie Korngold from Adventure Rabbi, or she is not from Adventure Rabbi, she is Adventure Rabbi. Rabbi Jamie Arnold from Evergreen, Beth Evergreen, right?
Yay.
Is that correct?
That's it.
And Rabbi Tirzah Firestone. And Rabbi Har-DiGennaro, or do you go by Uri Har?
Whatever you want.
Okay. I'm Rabbi Marc Soloway, and I'm going to be introduced now to Kara Mertz, who's going to be our mediator and referee for the evening. Kara has been working with the city of Boulder for some time, and was the city manager. And she has dealt, assistant city manager, sorry, and she has dealt with city council on several occasions, so we think she is qualified to deal with the council of rabbis. And so Kara's going to get up and introduce herself a bit further and tell all of you about the ground rules for this evening.
Great, thank you. So someone just asked if we're going to use loudspeakers or microphones. I don't think we are. If there's any point at which you can't hear the question or hear the answers, just raise your hand, and I'm sure any of us would be happy to repeat the answers or questions. The format for this evening, first of all, thank you all very much for coming. It's a wonderful, cozy room, and hopefully we will have a very cozy conversation. It won't come to fisticuffs. We are very blessed here in Boulder to have such a rich, intellectually rich and spiritually rich community, and the fact that all rabbis do talk to each other and are willing to talk to all of us about such interesting topics is quite an honor. So I think tonight's conversation will be a rich one as well. The format will be, I will ask a question. Each of the rabbis will try and speak for only about 2 minutes to answer the question. I will actually, with that raucous laughter, I will actually borrow Raj's watch to make sure that we stay more or less to that.
Doesn't someone have an iPhone app with a big bell on it?
That's true. I should have brought it. I didn't. I think my son's using mine, but. We can, I think the main order of business is to have a rich conversation. So we're not going to cut anyone off just to keep time. But as I said, I will ask a question. Each rabbi will try and answer give their thoughts in 2 minutes, and then we'll open it up for audience questions on that same topic for the rabbis. And then each rabbi or whomever would like to can answer the questions from the audience. We have between 2 or 4 questions that we will address in this hour and a half that we have. Is that correct? An hour and a half? 2 hours? With that, without further ado, does anyone have any questions about the format or any comments?
Yeah, just also that we're going to have the rabbis be able to talk to each other as well about their answers at some point.
Crosstalk.
Thank you.
And
Yes,
also
crosstalk is
just-
welcome.
As to set the container, what time are we going till?
I think we were scheduled to go till 9. It's probably fine if we go till 9:30. Do you know if we get kicked out at any point?
We don't get kicked out. We will,
Should go till 9:15.
9:15 will be a good estimate.
Yeah.
We'll try to do 45 minutes
This
per
is,
question.
this is not gonna be on that.
Okay, great.
It's not easy to
9:50.
hear the rabbis back here.
We're just mumbling, actually.
We're
right now.
mumbling, yeah.
That was on purpose.
10-4,
So,
we'll
thank
speak
you
loud and
for,
clear. Okay.
thank you for speaking up. And there are 3 seats right in the front row that are
Yeah, please come
available.
in.
Yeah, Rue, come up front.
Can you scoot one step towards your chair, because we can't see you right
I'm actually going to sit down
You're gonna sit,
when I
okay.
start. Yes, I'm going to sit down. Sorry, I don't mean to have my back toward anyone. Yes, there's 3 seats up here in the front row and 1 or 2 in the middle as well. The first question tonight is, did you always, as a rabbi, did you always get your spirituality from Judaism? And if not, from where? And it's kind of a 2-part question. And what remains from that time with you, and how does that come through now in your work with your congregation or in your work? We could start with Morah Yehdis.
I was just telling somebody that in the 7th grade I had this big crisis. I had a crush on my teacher of prophets and a crush on my teacher of literature and mythology, and I didn't know which direction to go. And it's really serious. I'm sharing something very sorry. It's okay. It's okay. I'm over it now. 40 years later.
Good show.
But seriously, I think I chose Judaism because I said, well, I'd rather analyze a verse that I think is coming from a divine source than a line of Shakespeare that might have been written in some bar over a few glasses of beer. So I think that I made a split in my life at that point, and I didn't feel whole until recently when I began to realize I can take things from the secular world that don't necessarily conflict with Judaism, but are part of what's called the wisdom of the world rather than the Torah of the world. So at this point, I feel like I can integrate the two. So that's been a very deep experience for me.
Thank you.
Oh, we're going this way.
We'll start with someone else next question.
No, that's great. I think so. I would say, first of all, Judaism has always been part of my spiritual or religious reality and practice. But there are other things that I've leaned on more heavily in the past, and I guess the two that they're not religious practices per se. They're not religious practices at all. But the two that I would say, one is music. Music has, for a long time, was sort of the connective bridge between my soul and the outside world. And I relied on it pretty heavily to have an experience that felt transcendent. And I'm very, I do want to be cautious about categories. Music, I don't think it wouldn't be fair to call it a religious tradition. I think that's pretty obvious. It doesn't have an ethic. It doesn't have spiritual disciplines, although music lovers create their own rituals out of it. But I point to it just because for me it was a bridge to the transcendent, and that's always been important to me. And I find that when I drift from music, because you go through phases in life where you have more or less time for certain things, and when I drift from music, I feel less connected. And the answer is yes, I do draw that into my practice as a Jew. And then the other I would say is philosophy. For a long time, I was really intent on exploring philosophy, sometimes theology, but really often just pure philosophy, as also as a bridge to the transcendent, as a way of understanding, with little dabbles of other meditative practices. But I'll leave it at that. And that too, I've drawn into my reality as a religious Jew.
How about as a leader of a congregation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to that is yes, but it's because it's so, both of those things are just so part of who I am that it comes out. But it's not as though I have, okay, it's time for tefillah, let's stop, now we're doing music, now we're doing philosophy, and then we'll go back into the tefillah. But it's just sort of wrapped up with, with what I am.
So my parallel spiritual founts have always been Judaism and nature. And I think that one of the terms I really like, I heard this recently, was thin places. Has anyone heard of that? Thin spots. So I think this is an Episcopalian term. They talk about thin spots as the places where you can access God most easily. So Judaism is, I was raised in a really religious Reformed family. My parents helped establish the congregation, and my mom was the president, and my dad taught the bar mitzvah class. And the synagogue was seldom a thin place for me. But nature frequently is. And so for me, my Judaism became really powerful and sustainable and gained its longevity when I reached back in both of them and realized they both actually started in the same place. And that has, of course, been where my rabbinate is all about, is finding the intersection of those two and figuring out how they can enrich, inspire, and sustain each other.
I want to be that brief.
You do adventures in your mind.
You also have to do that when you're the adventure rabbi, because they
want to walk.
I have to keep up with,
Right.
You can teach us rabbi if you can keep up.
I'm the out-of-towner Jamie, I'll try to be quick. There are 4 moments of sort of choices and transitions that I can recall. The first one, I was 13, and I was preparing for my bar mitzvah, and I told my dad that I could never adopt a religion that restricted my eating habits. I did the bar mitzvah anyway, but I basically disavowed religion. When I was 17, the Chavurah that my family was a part of, it was more like a culture group and a book club than it didn't daven or anything. It wasn't a religious group. Had different faith leaders come to the group, and I was introduced to Zen, Buddhism, Zen practice, and I became pretty invested in Zen practitioner as a practitioner, and then in college studied Buddhist philosophy and Christian mysticism. When I was 20, I read Joseph Campbell and became a student of comparative religion and mythology, and got invested in the idea of how culture and community can nourish an individual's spiritual life. Prior to that, it was just my own practice. I didn't have a community I was doing it with. I spent 6 months in Tibet, studying Tibetan Buddhism and living on a monastery. But just before I left for Nepal, I fell in love with a woman who wanted to settle down and raise a Jewish family.
Gotcha.
7 years later, I ended up in rabbinical school.
Some woman.
Yes, trying to keep up with her learning, and when by the time I finished rabbinical school, I decided I wanted to be a rabbi. How those intersections and those encounters with other, particularly Christian mysticism and Tibetan Buddhism, nourish my rabbinate are the emphasis on mindfulness and awareness, the practical spiritual techniques of meditation, and applying meditation techniques in anything you do, and also an appreciation for the variety of sacred narratives on this planet, and how I can learn about my sacred narrative by reading a Tibetan scripture and Christian scripture and Hindu scripture and prior to them. So that appreciation allows me to do my interfaith work in Evergreen, and also allows me to, I think, helps me facilitate a congregation that has over 50% interfaith couples, and where many of the practitioners, their primary spiritual path is not Judaism.
So I actually tried to get into other religions and couldn't. They wouldn't accept me. It was a little bit of a hard.
It's the hat.
Tirzah's bias comes out early. So, does everyone's laughter count towards my 2 minutes, or does it? Okay.
Extra time.
Okay, here we go. So, no, I'm actually serious. The pivotal night of my life, which I only discussed the details of on Purim, was I saw a woman walking off into the sunrise talking to God. Or I didn't know what she was doing, but she looked like she was deep into something. And she came back and I said, "What were you doing?" And she said, "I was talking to God." And I said, "What?" And I felt such a deep emptiness in my life at that point. Like, I want to talk to God too, and I have no idea where to start. And so I was like, I want something spiritual. And I literally went back to my dorm room and picked up a book by Suzuki on Zen Buddhism, and I literally did not know which way to hold the book. I could not understand the first 2 words of what it said. I wanted it to make sense. I wanted it to appeal to me. And I couldn't even understand what he was saying on any level. And I felt even worse about myself and even deeper into this void. And I looked on my shelf, and God knows why the book was on my shelf but I had the Gates of Prayer prayer book on my shelf. You know when you get confirmed and then they give you like a prayer book, and you somehow... I schlepped mine to college. I've got absolutely no idea how it actually made it to college. And I opened it up, and I actually had gone to an Orthodox day school, but was raised in a Reform home. And that was confusing in and of itself. And you can imagine. And I was expecting to be familiar with the prayer that I opened up to in the Gates of Prayer prayer book, but I was not familiar with it at all, and that made me feel even lousier. But somehow at that moment, I put my stake in with Jewish. I don't know how, but at that point, even though I didn't find the experience that I wanted like a moda'ani, you know, of something that would just resonate with me and say like, yes, me, soul, God, and I didn't find it. And yet, somehow at that moment, I put my hat in with Jewish. And then, I don't know how it happened. I had a girlfriend who told me I should keep Shabbat, who was not Jewish. And then, so I sat in my dorm room in the dark by myself for 24 hours on Shabbat, and that was how I celebrated. I was a Karaite. That was, I guess, my early spiritual experience. And then somehow, 8 months later, I was in Israel. 3 weeks later, I was religious. 10 years later, I was a rabbi. Something happened. And but in terms of answering the question, in terms of what really comes in to my personal practice and to my congregation. In terms of my personal practice, I think that when your Jewish or when your religious experience starts with a positive, like I opened the window and I saw the mountains and there was God, when it starts with a positive, that can really color your religious experience. And when it starts with a negative, that can color your experience as well. But there's always sort of a clamoring or a struggle to not fall into that emptiness, if I could be honest. So I would call my Judaism existential in a sense, and I had some dabbling in existential philosophy, but I think it's an existential struggle for me, and Judaism is my lifeboat in that, in a sense. And I think along the lines of what Morah Yehdis was saying, I think what influences me most in my Judaism outside of Judaism is psychology, brain science. Those are things that interest me deeply. Sociology. I like the sciences. I like to study and understand how do communities work, how do people work, how do relationships work, what gets people involved. So I'm interested in the sort of sociodynamics, I guess you would call it. So that brings in, I don't know how much that enters into my synagogue. I guess I could ask the people who are here, how much that enters in, but I think I keep it to myself basically. But it's always on my mind and informs my sense of what a community is and what a community should be.
Great. Okay, I'm just going to put a pause button on for just a moment to say, wow, this is amazing. This is really cool. And had I grown up in a Jewish community that did this sort of thing, that the rabbis sat together and told their inner secrets and stories, I never would have left. I wouldn't have left, but then I probably wouldn't have come back.
Right.
So my story is all too well documented. I'll only say that I was raised in a very Orthodox household. People wore hats like that.
Black. They were black. This is
They
brown.
weren't brown. They weren't brown. That's
Yeah.
right. No, all joking aside, in a very firm household, which felt stultifying to my spirit and to my personal nature, and I felt that I had to spread my wings and go exploring and find in other places, because I didn't feel that I could find it in a place that was hosting such dogmatic approaches, a sense of direct spiritual experience. And so I traveled around the world, and that's, I've written about that, and then after a certain amount of time, and it was because of really going to the other side, so to speak, the Sitra Achra, the other side, and really being challenged from the other side about, wait a minute, who are you? Where do you belong? And really having to reanalyze and revisit, where did I come from? And understand, and I think something that many of us go through is this question that, well, if all of these beautiful things, meditation and studies of the journey of the soul and these direct spiritual experiences that we get from yoga and from sitting practice are there in all these other traditions, Judaism wouldn't have lasted for 4,000 years if it wasn't there too. And so there's this kind of like, oh, let me just cross back over the tracks and find it back in Yiddishkeit. And of course it's all there. It's really there. It's there in the most rich sense. What I did come back with when I came back was, first of all, a profound reverence for the cross-germination process, because I never would have, had I not been able to cross-germinate myself with all these other spiritual disciplines, I never would have come back to Judaism and said, wow, it's there, it's there, it's there. And also, I think the other thing that I brought back with me is the sense of, let's cut through the theology, let's cut through the words, and go right into a direct spiritual experience. And because I've had it here, I know we can have it here. On this side of the tracks, I know that we can do better as Jews, not getting strangled in our words and in our thoughts, our ideas, the verbiage, and really going right to the experience of oneness.
So I want to put a pause too for a second and say that Judaism never had a claim for monopoly on universal wisdom. And so I grew up in Israel as a Chilonit, as a secular Jew. And in an environment that was very materialistic oriented, and the emptiness was painful. So I found my way, being in the midst of Judaism, in a different world. Yeah? I found my way to across the ocean, as you said. I came to this country, and I had transcendental experiences that came from deep meditation practices sourced in Hinduism. I lived in a meditating community for about 13 years. I never left Judaism. I actually was introduced back into Judaism during that time. And that's a long story, and I won't go there. But I just want to say that in terms of how I bring it to whoever I deal with, or to my community, is once you have transcendental experiences, once you encounter cosmic consciousness, it becomes who you are. So it's never separated anymore, yeah? So it goes with me wherever I am. So it's not a matter of how I bring it to the community, it's just what is. Mm-hmm. And I feel myself very lucky because, like many other people around my age, in my generation, who explored across the border or explored in other places, I was able to come back to Yiddishkeit because there was Jewish renewal to accept me. And there was Rabbi Zalman Schachter-Shalomi, to welcome us. Yeah? And my concern is that there are many Jews out there, and I know for sure many Israelis, that travel to India or South America or who knows where. And when they come back to the community, they have no other Jews to share their new spirituality with. And so this is my concern.
Well, it's fun being lost.
One is Rishon next time.
That's right.
I keep thinking of a line from one of my favorite Tom Waits songs, which says, "I never saw my hometown till I stayed away too long." Anyone know that song? Never saw my hometown till I stayed away too long. And I feel like my journey for sure has involved other spiritual disciplines. I wouldn't quite say other religions, but many of you know I was an actor in London, on the stage mainly in London. And so I think as an artist, I feel like in some ways my soul is still the soul of an artist, which is, I've always been fascinated by the interface between art and spirituality, and art and religion, and creativity and religion. And so for me, it still very much informs the way I live a ritual life, because I think that mitzvot and davening, prayer, rituals are really, there's a way in which one can approach them as an artist as well as a religious practitioner. During my time as an actor, I actually discovered part of myself as a healer too, and I was a craniosacral therapist and a spiritual healer and a massage therapist. And during that time, I would say I actually did not really consider myself to be spiritually connected to anything. So that was the kind of away from my hometown. I didn't really feel connected to Judaism at all, and the Judaism that I grew up with, I never felt spiritually nourished by it. But something about discovering this myself as healer really opened something for me, and I studied fairly intensely like the system of chakras and energy healing and auric work, did work with auras and things like that. And then I had some teachers. I had a teacher of Taoist movement and meditation, and so I was reading a lot of Taoism, but I wasn't a Taoist, I wasn't a Buddhist, but I studied a lot of these things. But kind of like others have said, all of those things became the source of my spiritual nourishment, which I then found through really discovering Kabbalah, kind of really brought me back to Judaism, and once I came back to Judaism, I really found that everything that I felt nourished by could find a place in Judaism. And I think the second part of the question, I feel, how many congruents are truthfully, I think, if I'm really honest, if I give a real honest answer to that question, I think not enough. Because I feel there are pieces of my own soul that have been nourished in a way that I haven't found a successful way to bring into myself as a rabbi. But I'm working on it. And one other thing is that I'm still very open. Like I think Tirzah said, I kind of the core of my being, I'm a universalist. So as much as I find absolute depth and beauty in the particular practice of Judaism, I am so at the heart of all mystical traditions. The ultimate is that everything is one. I was recently on Thanksgiving Day. Actually, I was in Thailand in a retreat center, and I received the Diksha, which is it was a very powerful experience. And there wasn't a moment where I felt that there was anything that was like contradicting anything that I believed Jewishly. The Diksha is a Hindu-based oneness kind of meditation where different people actually put energy through you by touching your head and bring you. It's a very powerful practice. Anyway, it involved meditation and receiving this thing, and it didn't. I was so aware of here I am, a conservative rabbi sitting in Thailand with these weird people putting their hands on me doing this picture. Is it okay? And they were, yeah. it really is okay. And for me, it was a profound sense of connecting some of the dots in my life, which.
As a Kohen, you're used to giving blessings.
Right.
Your picture.
It's interesting that so many of what the theme of what you're talking about is so much the coming together of emptiness and fullness. And when you're going to that place where they come together, it seems right, but it's often difficult to get there. So I guess with that, we'll open up. If anyone has any questions or comments of your own experience, requests of the rabbis, if you're a congregant, I suppose. Nudge you to please bring this more into your practice, maybe.
Or there's more Tom Waits.
Marc Soloway from Congregation B'nai Shalom.
I'm Ori Har-DiGennaro, and I'm connected with Pardes Levavot and with Conscious Learning Community and the Center for Spiritual Friendship. All three.
Tirzah Firestone, Neve Kodesh.
Gavriel Goldfeder, Ish Kodesh.
Jamie Arnold, Beth Evergreen, and I'm also on the board of the Interfaith Alliance in Denver, Colorado.
Jamie Korngold, Adventure Rabbi, Synagogue Without Walls.
Josh Rose, I work with Deborah Bronstein at Har Hashem.
Yehdis Fishman, Eish Kodesh, and hidden Jews everywhere.
That's right, that's very true. In every congregation.
They're hiding.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, Yehuda is secretly rabbi to people in all of our congregations.
Also
That is
secret.
true.
There's no secret.
And all of us.
So I have a question for anybody who wants to answer. I'm personally very curious about awe, experiences of awe, whether it's a waterfall, a near-death experience, watching someone, or actually giving birth. And I'm curious if that is, an awe experience has impacted anybody and their relationship to Judaism.
Did everyone hear the question? Yeah? Okay.
Can I answer? Because I teach a weekly class in Musar. It's a Jewish spiritual ethical discipline, and our midah, our attribute for the month, is yirah, is awe. But it's, I think, we've hinted at it. The experience of the transcendent or of oneness, or of, in colloquial terms we say when our mind gets blown. Right? When we get outside of our mind and have I-thou direct experience, that for me is core to why I do what I do, who I see myself as, my relationship to nature, to the creatures of the world, to human beings, and it informs everything from my politics to my religious practice to my parenting, and that finding paths to cultivate yirah, to cultivate the sense of awe, to instigate it, finding techniques to do that is a constant search, because some of the ones we use get stale, and we have to renew them or rejuvenate them, and that's where, for me, the sort of cross-fertilization of faiths and the blessing of living in this country, where that's possible, makes the menu larger and the possibilities larger.
Well spoken.
So I'm Rabbi Jamie, and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who's one of the great contemporary thinkers of our time, he said, awe rather than faith is the cardinal value of the religious Jew. Awe rather than faith. And he also said, God begins where words end. God begins where words end. So the idea of both of those being that we have to get out of our minds, right? We have to get past the place where our intellect clutters our experience so that we can have an awe experience. And to me, the whole synagogue experience is about that. I mean, that's what we're trying to create. Some of us experience that through that moment of awe, through prayer, some of it through action, some of us through action, some of us through community, and some of us it's from climbing to the top of the mountain where there's nothing left to say except Wow.
Say my separation.
So, So if you were on one of my Adventure Rabbi hikes and you had asked that question, somebody, right, Raj? Somebody would have said chapter 4, because it's the whole 4th chapter of my book. That's what it's about. It's about rediscovering awe. And I think for me, that's like the key to my practice. Is right there. Is because it's so hard in our world. We things aren't a mystery to us anymore. You know, we know why. You know, we know the sun isn't really rising. You know, this is spinning, and we know why this is happening and that is happening. And so, you know, it's very hard to create moments of awe. But we can create that into a spiritual practice where, you know, suddenly looking at your hand is a moment of awe.
And isn't that why people search to begin with in other religions? Because the Judaism that they grew up with in a synagogue didn't bring that awe for them.
As far as I'm concerned, God doesn't belong in any religion, in any particular religion. And so all religions really can serve as a conveyor belt, as a sacred conveyor belt to bring us to awe. Because, we are here in Judaism, and just a very good conveyor belt. And so we can include, we can embrace these mystical stories, the stories about awe, the teaching from the Torah that says, Reshit Chochma Yirat Hashem. Before the beginning of wisdom comes from awe. Yeah, that's a quote from Psalms. And is it right? Is it from Psalms? Yeah. Just checking. And so we can take all of this wisdom that we have, all of this wonderful tradition that we have, and it has become somewhat stale, and transcend that scientific explanation that we are so embedded in our society that really puts down that kind of awe, yeah? That really crushes it and says, that's not practical, that's not logical, yeah? That's the society that we live in mostly. And so we can take the religion, in this case Judaism, and carry with us this treasure through the cynical layer and bring it to a higher place where we can feel comfortable with awe and live with it in its fullness and let it inform our life and inform our spirituality.
So I want to say a couple of things. One is I want to share an experience that I had, or describe an experience that I had, which I think can only be described as awe. And it came to me. Really, it was like a bolt of lightning. It was not a cultivated experience. It didn't come from a period of meditation. It didn't come from any religious discipline. It was literally, you know, I think I was trying to go to sleep or something when it happened. In fact, I'm positive that's what was happening. I was just sort of like conking out for the night, and you know, clearly along the lines of what Jamie was saying, I'm not going to be able to put words on it, but essentially what happened was that I had this immediate, very deep, like under my intellect deep, like really at the core of my being, realization that I was flesh. There's no other way to really describe it. And it just felt like an utter dissolution of self. And my reaction, I mean, had I been someone who cultivated meditation and knew how to maybe deal with such experiences, I might have sort of embraced it or not fled from it. But it was so terrifying that you know, a better word for it in my experience was fear. And I think awe and fear, you know, there's a relationship. It really was utterly terrifying, and I pushed myself up off my bed because I wanted the experience to end. I really just had this very deep grokking of the idea that I was going to die. Not in the sense of I'm about to die, but like, whoa, I get it. Yeah, I'm a large slab of meat lying on a mattress in Southern California, and this is not going well. And it was really terrifying. And I mean, I don't say that with pride, because I think that was a very deep and true thing. I want to say two other things, and I will try to keep it brief. One thing is that while that was an immensely powerful experience that just cut under all of the other layers of, let's just call it baggage, that I carried around with me, in spite of the power of that, I think that sometimes there is a thirst and a desire for extraordinary religious experience that can actually be counterproductive. That very often, some of you in the room may have had an experience like I just described. Others of you may not, and you may feel like, man, that's what a real religious experience is about. I'm going to go home and try to realize that I'm a slab of meat. But I think that craving something that is extraordinary can often be really, you're missing an opportunity that's right in front of you, because that's one mode of religious reality. And then the final thing I'll say is that I think that they're totally antithetical to that experience of immediacy, pre-intellectual experience of immediacy, of awe. I had one of the reasons I'm here is because I studied Confucianism. I don't mean here tonight in this building, but one of the reasons I became a rabbi was because I studied Confucianism, and I'm putting the emphasis on the word study. I have a degree in theology that I got before I became a rabbi, and there's a professor named Du Wei Ming who was essentially trying to do with Confucianism what I think it's fair to say everybody here is trying to do, which is to take this ancient form and to make it relevant to the 21st century. And when he was describing how Confucian ritual could be articulated as a network of relationships and rituals that begin with the individual and radiate out into the entire cosmos, on a very intellectual level, I thought, wow, that is my doorway into understanding halakha. That's the deal. He just this Confucian guy who has no idea that I'm even in his class just named it for me. So I think that there's also a very I don't want to diminish the intellectual dimension of the ability to open religious doors. Sometimes it's antithetical to intellect. Other times, I mean, I guess depending on who you are, the intellect can also be a door. So they're opposite experiences, but I think that they're part of the whole.
Pick up a little bit on what Josh was saying in number 2, I think it was.
Did I really keep it to 3?
It was like 3A, 3B. Intellectual PowerPoint. It was, I try to think about my experiences of awe. It's a good question, and I think that in Josh's middle point there, I think talking about that seeking awe is not necessarily an ideal, and not necessarily an ideal. I'm sure some people have it. I don't. I have had awe experiences. I remember when I was in yeshiva, when I was in seminary, we're talking about 97 to 2003, and sometimes we'd be in the middle of a prayer, the silent prayer, the Amidah, and suddenly I would just reach this point where I became absolutely clear that I was standing before God, and I would just have these moments of just, I don't know if it was terror, but just wow, and like it would take me sometimes half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour to finish, each word was just like in the Garden of Eden. I mean, it was such a sublime experience. You never wanted to leave it. And then you get married. And then it's like, and you have 12 minutes for Mariv. Do you know what I mean? And it's sort of like the whole, and the emphasis shifted. Like that was something that I got to have when I was in yeshiva, and that was amazing. And I used to do that, pray, and I used to go out in the woods and pray in my own words to God. And those were amazing experiences. And yet something shifted at a certain point where it was no longer something I was looking for. Not that it doesn't happen anymore, but it's no longer something that I'm looking for. Excuse me. I think it happens as a result of, I always thought of it as, if you can imagine a pool or a clay pot that after a certain number of drops of water falls into it, it'll break. And each moment is a drop, and each moment, and I believe that Jewish practice is designed to provide moments, whether it's a blessing over a piece of food, or whether it's how I get dressed, or how I learn Torah, or how I live my day, or how I talk or don't talk in a certain situation. And then I do those and do those and do those, and then in certain situations it just opens up and becomes an entirely new experience for me. So I don't think I'm really looking for it anymore. I love it when it comes. It certainly keeps you going. You get one of those, you can find enough inspiration to continue for some time. But it's ceased to be the emphasis in a sense in my life. I'm more interested in connection and relationship I am at this point than I am in awe. And not that connection and relationship can't be a conduit for awe. I do believe it can as well. But I do believe in, for myself, being a consistently good and available and paying attention person for the people that are in my life and for my community. And sometimes that leads to great moments of, wow, this person's asking me a question about their marriage, and I could really help them go either way on this one. You know? And that's
awful.
That's awful, right? And then there's usually the, oh man, I got that one wrong.
That's the awesome.
So it comes at those moments of realizing the impact. And I think of being a rabbi, I think that when you're up there in front of the room, sometimes you get a feeling of like, it's Yom Kippur, it's Kol Nidre, or it's Ne'ilah, and like, or we're about to blow the shofar, and like everyone's sitting here listening to me, or sleeping, and there's a powerful moment here. And I think at those moments when someone grabbed me the night and said, you look a little bit nervous, and I said, I'm always nervous when I do this. Whenever I'm up in front of a group, if I knew what I was going to say and I had a speech, then I wouldn't be nervous. But the fact is, I get up here and we're interacting and trying to, I would call it surf a little bit, trying to really experience what's happening in the room. And there's an amazing moment there of like I could really have an impact on somebody's life. So those are moments of awe for me that I cherish and also tremble before.
One moment of awe that happened to me in 1975, I was in a house that burnt down on Christmas Eve. And I got out just by the skin of my teeth, basically, with a bathrobe on in a Boston cold, frozen winter. And while I was watching my house burn down and I had all the terror and shock, I remember I had one moment of total euphoria, and I had this conversation with God, and I said, wow, you can take everything away from me except who I am. Mm-hmm. And the next day I looked in the Torah portion for that day, and it was the portion of Moses standing by the thorn bush, and the bush was on fire and not consumed. That's not awe, I don't know what is.
It'd be better if your house hadn't been consumed.
That would have been cool.
But herself has been considered. That was her moment.
All right, you're right. I'll take it. We'll take it.
So maybe we'll move on to the next question here. And it is somewhat related, although at first it might not seem so. What was the hardest encounter you have had with a Jew that was practicing another religion or faith? And it might be interesting, maybe I don't want to, never mind. I was just thinking, it might be interesting to think about...
Name names.
It might be interesting to think about if you've had an experience of someone coming to you that had experienced deep awe or deep revelation in another faith, and how you handle that as a rabbi.
Okay.
Just a thought. You don't have to. Let's start with you.
Did we get these questions in advance?
No. He's the only one that saw them. Maybe we should start with you.
I'm probably the most opinionated, so I'll go middle.
I mean, I think that just thinking about naming names, no, but I mean, because of as I've already said, like my childhood experience, there was nothing particularly spiritual about my connection to Judaism growing up, and so I know many people who have never discovered that. So I know people who have been brought up Jewish and then become very, very involved in, and in some cases are, ministers and practitioners of other religions, and have never came back in any way or never considered coming back in any way to Judaism. So that, I mean, I'm troubled by that because I feel like even though I also had many important and wonderful experiences outside the Jewish community, ultimately I found a great depth and richness and joyful connection to Judaism. So it's kind of, I just have great sadness about people who have never found anything of value in Judaism and then are just happily practicing and teaching and leading another religion.
Mm-hmm. We'll go next. I want to name something in the room, and that's we're living in a Christian culture, and one of my, it's really being in very close quarters with a devout Christian that sprang me back into Yiddishkeit, into Judaism, and sort of compelled me to revisit my roots. But I have experienced as a professional Jew, as a rabbi, I've experienced tremendous grief when I meet Jews who, it's a little bit too a double-edged sword. It's both grief and maybe it's some envy when I come into contact with Jews who know Torah because Torah means, they're reading Isaiah or they're reading Psalms, and it is clear to them, completely transparent, that this is about Yeshu, about Jesus coming, and they understand the messianic consciousness, they understand it, and they know Jesus, and they have a direct connection, a relationship. And my first response is, it's so easy for you, huh? I wish it were that easy for me, because I go in and out, I wax and wane. I don't always have it's not just a blanket relationship. I have to work so hard for my relationship with Hashem. But there's also tremendous grief, I feel, also, in the same breath, that this person is already the book is closed, and that they probably won't, like you're saying, won't revisit. And yet, and then I came back. So I have tremendous, I'm always reminding myself that we need to have tremendous patience for the organicity, the organic nature of this unfolding. And we don't know what Hashem has in mind for us and where we're going to get close to Hashem. And I think I want to say this, even though it's certainly not evident in this group of rabbis, and I just can't say Ashrenu enough how lucky I feel to be in this group of rabbis. If this is really Gan Eden, that we can talk like this, and that this is really unusual. If anyone, sometimes I wonder about the children that get born and raised in Boulder, that that they're going to have serious mental problems when they leave this community. And
They'll all be Haredi in no time.
Now they're going to see how Jews treat each other, or also Jewish politics. And Jewish politics, I think, is worthy of saying, outside of this community, is really often about numbers. It's a numbers game. It's about how many Jews we're keeping, and how our attrition rates, and whether we've lost so many to Christianity, or who's converting or leaving, or how many Buddhists have become, and whether Jews are affiliating or not. And that is a very, very big thing in the Jewish community in this country and abroad. And it's really about keeping our numbers. And I think that by virtue of keeping our numbers, we're losing. That numbers game helps us to lose numbers. But how did I get on that? It seems very intricately, intimately interrelated, that we really need to know also that people have different journeys, and we have to go. Sometimes we have to go away. Sometimes we come back. Sometimes we don't. But that for each of us, we're going to find, hopefully, God willing, find our dveikut, our connection and our closeness to spirit in the path that we're going. And sometimes that's Jewish and sometimes it's not. I'm trying to draw out my judgments. So that's Gamarti.
I'll take them up. So can I go next, or you can go? Is that okay? Did you want to go next?
I go after you.
Okay.
I know how to be patient.
I would hope so after all those years of meditation.
It comes with the rabbinate.
Right. I guess I'm saying the same thing I said before. I'm not sure that this is about experiences of God or experiences of like my path or my soul. I believe that that we have and I don't believe that all paths at the core lead to the same place. I genuinely believe that Jews are meant to be Jewish and are meant to practice in Judaism, and I believe that that is for our own good and for the good of the world. I believe that this practice is one that needs to be taken up by Jews. And Rav Kook said something like a Jew without Torah is like a boat on turbulent waters, that there's really never any rest for a Jew who doesn't find it. And often you find that angry Jewish Buddhists, is a good example, who are like, everything's peaceful, but when you bring up Judaism, all of a sudden it gets really flaring. Because there's not peace, and half the people are laughing because they do it, and half, but it's because it's sort of I just don't believe that it's about finding the Godhead or about having these experiences. I think that that's a nice that's icing on the cake, and it's nice when you're in yeshiva or you're searching the world. But I believe that ultimately we are meant to find our way back to this. Now, I would couple that with a good story. Rabbi Shlomo Freifeld, who no one knows about in the entire world, who was one of the most interesting and dynamic rabbis in the land. And he he was like in the 70s, and all kinds of crazy people were coming to him. And one guy came to him and said, "I'm really just interested in Native American spirituality." And Rabbi Freifeld said something like, "Come back in a week." And the guy comes back in a week and he finds Rabbi Freifeld with a stack of books on Native American spirituality this high on his desk that he's been going through to try to understand what this guy's about. Right? As opposed to being like, oh, Narishkeit, you shouldn't be doing that, you should be Jewish. That's not anyone who knows me knows that that's not my attitude. I don't think I've ever said those words. But it really is about understanding people. But I do ultimately believe that that I would prefer, and I will go out on a limb and even say that I would believe that God would prefer that a Jew be aligned with Jewish practice, regardless of denomination. I'm not going to get into that at all. But I do believe that it's an interesting tension and potential hypocrisy that we all have, that we all ventured out so far in our own lives, and now we're rabbis, and we're kind of being like, oh, come on. You're a minister of what? Come on. Come home. Come to Shabbos. And so it's like we've been there, and we've kind of like, and maybe there's that sense of being able to say, you know what, I've experienced them all too, and let me just tell you, by my own personal identity and my choice, I can tell you that I really think that this is really the way to go. But it's like we all, I think, are dancing with that impatience of we don't want to judge it, but we also know at the same time, like this is kind of this is the way that can bring alignment to all the different elements of our lives, physical and spiritual, personal and communal. Community and world. There's so many things that come alive and come together within Judaism, and I think that that I personally am biased towards that, and I admit that openly. Although again, I think like that story of Rabbi Freifeld, I very, very rarely, if ever, would come out and say, if someone comes in, I get this in my community, oh, I went to this shamanic training weekend, and I say, wow, like how was it? Because I really want to know, like how was it? That sounds really cool, but at the same time, I'm not like really being like, you should definitely be a shaman. That's not gonna like it's sort of that's cool. And I think like what Tirzah was saying on the last question, that's here too. Like whatever's on that side of the tracks is also on this side of the tracks. So let's see if we can find that together. And I agree that Judaism is not shamanic enough. I think that element is missing. But I do. But I think it's a tension that we're all probably in. We're kind of having come over this side of the tracks, and not just. I think that was the tension. The numbers is like, why did you want this guy? You know what I mean? Because you represent professional Judaism, and like it would be just like good for Boulder if 12,001 people were now Jewish or whatever. But at the same time, we're always in that. So because of the authenticity of our own journeys, we're not so willing to kind of do violence to someone else's journey. And I think it's an interesting tension for us to live in, and one that we should know better about ourselves. Ori's been waiting forever. Look at her. She's in that stoic patience moment.
That was good. Sorry, I almost feel like saying, what was the question?
I can repeat the question if you'd like. The question was, what was the hardest encounter that you've ever had with a Jew who was practicing another religion or faith?
Oh yeah, no. I don't think I ever had a hard experience with a Jew like this. So first of all, I was one of them. I would say that now, to echo what you said, Reb Gav, that's how I like to call him, okay. Is that I mostly feel sadness that within all of that wonderful exploration, that person cannot find or include the Yiddishkeit, the Jewishness that they have in them. that they have to push it away, that they cannot include it and integrate it. That it's mostly sadness, not harshness. And one of the joys of my rabbinate, so to speak, is that I am leading or facilitating group spiritual direction. And a few of the groups are interfaith groups. And so, for example, in one of my groups now, I have a deeply mystical Christian, a Buddhist, and a couple of Jews. No, more than a couple, in variety from all congregations. So it's a very mixed group. And it's just such a joy because to hear just what you asked, to hear that people just feel close to God in their avenue. It's just like I feel like taking off my hat and saying namaste to each one of them, because the God in them and the God in me is one. Yeah. And maybe I will say something that is not so popular. I think that if we're talking about hard experience, is that I personally experienced, I had hard experience, not with Jews that went away, but on the contrary, with Jews that have, I would say, diplomatically, narrow definitions of halacha. Okay? With Jews who have a hard time to accept me as a woman rabbi, or have a hard time to accept me as a spiritual being. This is where I find the hardship more. Sorry, I knew it would be a downer.
Yeah, we were having such fun.
You know, if we didn't accept her, then she'd leave.
Yeah, I haven't had an encounter with this rabbi, but I have a pen pal, an inmate who I write with regularly, and he has a couple other rabbis in the country that he writes with, and he was writing saying that the last rabbi he said told him he should not even look at or consider looking at other religions or learning about other religions, and that in fact it was idolatry to do so. And that I would group with not just a Jew who has found a way to read scripture that proves a Christian theology or a Messianic Jewish theology in the same boat, because they have a clear sense that there is one truth, and that theirs is the truth, and that other truths are not truths. Had a phone call this week also from a guy who was raised as a Jew, found Jesus, wanted to know if he was welcome at the synagogue, and these other synagogues from Denver had kicked him out of the, and how, so having a conversation with this guy said, well, are you interested in a dialogue, or are you interested in preaching to us? And he was clear he was interested in preaching. I had to tell him, I don't think you'll feel welcome here. Nobody is going to ask you to leave, but I don't think you'll feel welcome. So that's the difficult personalities, both sides of that. And there are two quotes from Mordechai Kaplan that come to mind. One is that it is not the seeking after the truth that divides. It is the claim to have found the truth and the only path to truth that divides. So that's one of Kaplan's quotes, and that informs my position on this. And the second is that you judge, in judging other religions or other faiths, that you should not judge their theology, because no one of us can claim more of an access to truth. But you should ask, rather than asking, what do you believe, or who's your community, or who's your God, ask, how does your faith inform your practice, your behavior? How does it affect how you treat one another, how you treat the earth? You can expand it. So you don't judge a creed on its platform, but on how it's implemented.
It's like Rabbi Zalman says, how are you Jewing?
How are you Jew? That's right. It's not, are you a Jew or not are you Jew, but how are you Jew? Exactly. So that's how I would say. I'll be honest too. The most difficult encounter was early on was when a member of my family joined a Messianic Jewish community, and have since found that that's actually easier than those who claim that they only have one truth, and that's the only truth.
So I would say my hardest situation was a bar mitzvah a couple years ago, when I worked with a student whose family came to Rosh Hashanah and then went to church. You know, the kid went to church every Sunday and was in the religious school at his church in the youth group. And when I worked at a conventional congregation, you know, there were really, I liked the rules that kind of protected me from having to make decisions like that. Like, I wasn't allowed to do interfaith weddings. If kids were having two religions, they weren't allowed in our religious school. And, you know, the view was like people had to make a certain level of commitment to get in. And if they didn't want to make the commitment, then they didn't get in, and someone else would take care of them. And then when I started the Adventure Rabbi program, which is, you know, this new kind of synagogue, now I'm the person that takes care of those people. So this family came to me, and the son really wanted a bar mitzvah, and even to the day of his bar mitzvah, you know, I was still having conversations with his family saying, I really don't understand this. You know, I don't understand how this is working in your mind. I don't understand how, you know, we would have these conversations, but this and this conflict, and how are you doing it? And we would, you know, in my study, I only have one photo of a bar mitzvah, and it's his. In fact, it's the only life cycle event that's hanging in my office. It's his. Because for me, it was such a transformative experience to work with him, and I still don't understand it, you know? But it doesn't mean that I'm not willing. I wanted to open the door to his family, and it was an amazing experience for his family. It was an amazing experience for him. And it's really transformed my rabbinate in a lot of ways, and one of them is my views about interfaith weddings, which is that we have 3 rabbis on our staff. So I'm fortunate to have one rabbi, and he specializes in interfaith weddings and interfaith co-officiation, and that's his thing. So I don't have to do interfaith weddings if I don't want to. In fact, I don't have to do any weddings if I don't want to. He does them all. And recently, about a month ago, it came to me that my issue is not interfaith weddings. My issue is that I don't want to be a rental rabbi. So I don't want to work with people I don't know. So if there's 2 Jewish people that come to me and they say, you know, will you do our wedding? And they've never come to an Adventure Rabbi program and I don't know who they are, I'll say no, and I'll send them to Rabbi Bogage. And if, like this morning, I had a woman call me who's been coming to Rosh Hashanah, you know, for years, and she just got engaged, and she's marrying a nice Catholic boy, and I'm going to do her wedding because I have a relationship with her. So what I finally realized for myself is that if I have a relationship with people, I can open a door. I can be part of their journey. And that's the piece. Even if I don't get it, even if I never got it what this family was doing, and I never did, but I have a relationship with them now. And that's the piece that's primary to me.
Nice.
I want to start with a short story. There's a woman came in to see me because she wanted to talk about conversion to Judaism. She was Catholic, and I asked her to tell me a little bit about her upbringing. And as she was speaking, she was really getting quite passionate about how positive her experiences with the church had been, and how deep they were, and how really meaningful they were. And I was sort of waiting for her to turn the corner on the story, like to the part where it got all horrible. But it kept unfolding, like all these beautiful experiences. And finally I was like, there's a major misunderstanding in this room. And I said to her, I want to be clear, if you were to go down this path, it would require that you renounce Jesus as a manifestation of God. And she looked at me like she was completely astonished. She was like, really? And I was like, yeah, really. And we talked for another couple minutes, and I was like, it was really great to meet you. And I loved that. I loved the encounter because it was so completely clear. You know, there was no ambiguity about boundaries for me or questions that I had to wrestle with in terms of some of the things that we've said. It was just like, You're in the wrong office. It was really wonderful to talk to you. I think that what's really difficult for a lot of us, given how we've constructed our Judaism, is exactly these sort of boundary questions. I'm gonna spin it a little bit and just say that the most obstinate Jew I know is me. I'm not committed to any other religion. Just want to get that out there for those who are in my congregation. Let's make sure I've said that clearly. But when I wake up to daven in the morning and to put on tefillin, a lot of mornings it's sort of a wrestling match with the part of me who is committed to what I would say the religion of secularism. And I think that's in that sense we all of us deal every day, both in ourselves and with all of our congregants, with that boundary issue. That is, people who are deeply committed to the notion that secularism is in and of itself a fully and wholly complete worldview that doesn't require. And if they're immersed in it and attached to it, there's no requirement that they explore Judaism on any deep and significant level. And I'm not pointing fingers because I'm saying that's a voice that I have within me. And I think that's really the other religion, so to speak, that all of us wrestle with. And then I have a brother-in-law who is a deeply committed Buddhist. And what's painful is that he's actually very interested in, he wants Judaism to be compelling to him, but he can't seem to find a road in on a deep level. And that's difficult both because he's actually open to it, and also because he's so closely related to me. And I think in that case the challenge is also saying, hey, as you were saying, Gavriel and Tirzah both, like we have that here, we have that in our reality, in our tradition, and that presents a different kind of difficulty.
I have a kind of similar story to a few of you. When I was living in Santa Fe, my most faithful student was a woman, Jewish woman. She went by her Hebrew name and spent several years with a Native American and ended up Christian. I mean, believing in Jesus, basically. And yet very committed to Jewish food and a lot of other Jewish things. And I would have kind of similar arguments or discussions that, you can't be, a committed Jew and still believe in Jesus. And that was the only point of difficulty between us. And yet on all other, if I didn't talk about that, we were the closest people. She would call me, she would help me, and she actually brought a black woman to my class who ended up giving me a box of gold coins when I left. So I had very emotionally, and she got, I was teaching Hasidic mystical teachings, and she's the first one who got it. But if I ever get on that topic, it was, a buzzer. No, I try to think of things to tell her, like Shlomo Kalbach would tell people, okay, you found a bright light. We have many other bright lights. Come and check them out. Things like that. But nothing seemed to work with her. But I ended up, we're still good friends, but I ended up really questioning to myself, like Josh was saying, when I wake up in the morning too, my conflict is, do I say morning blessings right away or turn on my computer? And when I turn on my computer, the conflict grows stronger. I think of God looking down. I finished this blessing. Can I go? And it's not. And I think to myself, what is she doing in her prayer? She actually belonged to a church, and my kind of self-awareness that came out of it is my commitment to my Judaism as strong as her commitment is to the faith base that she has. And I don't know if some of you were there a few months ago. The Ian Peer, who wrote this book, My Jesus Year, was here, and he's an Orthodox rabbi from an Orthodox family, and he went around to visit various churches and asked, why are there more numbers there, basically, than there is in Judaism? And a lot of things came out, like, where is the passion, where is the spontaneity? And so I think really we can learn from these encounters if we don't come from a judgment place, but from a place of self-reflection. And why are these Jews looking at Christianity, looking at Buddhism Buddhism? Why aren't we providing, what they need to find satisfaction in Judaism?
I actually want to put that to Yehdis. Why is it that, of the registered American Buddhists, 25% are Jews? Why is that? And it's probably more by now. That was a statistic that was at least 8 years old. And that's not even, that doesn't count all the Naropa Jews and all the, the non-registered.
They say we control Hollywood, we actually control Buddhism.
It's true. Rabbi Zalman tells these really funny stories about having big panels of, the Sufi and the Sheikh and the Buddhist and the Zen and everybody, every one of them was Jewish. Everyone, except for the moderator. Why is that? And in the post-Holocaust generations, why is it that's my question, why is it that we are migrating and cross-fertilizing and going in every country around the world to absorb the depth and to be the religious archaeologists and get the nectar from each religion. I mean, I think that's fascinating. So that's my question. I have a few answers, but I want to hear what is that?
Well, I think part of it is what Reb Zalman said about quoting Shlomo when he spoke on his yahrzeit, that Jews were angry at God after the Holocaust, and they couldn't find the way to tap into that deep spirituality that's been so much a part of Torah and Judaism, but that was clamped down from so many different psychological and sociological aspects, and so they had to go to kind of clearer waters that didn't become muddied and fearful in a negative sense from that point. And also I feel that, like I said at the Derech Chaim class, I think that all the denominations in Judaism, excuse me, Gavriel, but just to mention that idea that I think every denomination is kind of like touching a part of the elephant and treating it as the whole. And when you do that, then you lose that sense of really oneness that's at the core of Judaism. And I think, I would say that, the most orthodox as well as the most liberal takes on a very narrow radar screen of what Torah and Judaism really is, and then treats it as the whole. And in a way that's a definition of idolatry. Idolatry is taking apart and treating it as the whole.
Beautiful.
Wow.
I think it may have something to do with our archetype. Abraham was told to leave behind the life and the religiosity of his father. Now, it's more complicated than that because Terach, his father, had already begun the same journey that Abraham picked up. Right? He had already begun to leave Ur Kasdim and head towards Canaan. But we end the Torah portion, so you forget that part when you start Lech Lecha, so it's a whole new start. So there is this sense of to be followers of Abraham, we need to break from the traditions of our foreparents. And so I think there is some way in which that
Beautiful.
Search for something else and exploration of other paths is actually a part of our Yiddishkeit.
Beautiful.
And not just a reaction to the Holocaust or the sociological, history, the causes of history. And it takes a few generations, right, to go to Egypt and then come home. And that sometimes happens. But that big picture, I don't know, when I started reading the story of Abraham, my journey in going to other paths was affirmed in that, hey, I was just being like Abraham, leaving it, that kind of piece. So I think there may be something in that's how you be Abraham, the seed of Abraham.
Beautiful. And he was an idol smasher. He was an iconoclast.
Right.
And we have to keep redoing that and breaking the idols in our own religion constantly, and where we are constantly recreating ourselves as the answer, it's a fixed answer, then we have to keep smashing it again and again.
I just heard this beautiful line from Rumi, if you put my words in a box, the box becomes your coffin. So that's the sense of crystallizing something so hard that it can't be opened.
I think also the idea of being Yisrael, those who wrestle with God, historically speaking, our fighting ring, or our area to wrestle with, has been within Judaism. And in this day and age, we can wrestle with new opponents. We can learn how to grapple in new ways. And whether that's in service of bringing it back to the ones that we used to practice with and strengthen our skills, or just expanding the ability to wrestle in new ways, it seems really appropriate for this day and age that Yisrael goes out in the world and wrestles with all of the various ways that we can try and connect and understand God and existence.
I just want to preface the question by saying I feel really deeply connected to Judaism and feel really connected to the community and feel close to many people who are up there. And this is a question that I struggle with a lot. And if we take Judaism out of the box, and if we take Christianity out of the box, we take all the religions and out of the box, and we extract them all down to their spiritual essence, is there a commonality there? And or is there something really unique about Judaism, something really unique about Christianity? So what, and I guess my question is, how are they different? How are they similar? And is there something almost paradoxical or contradictory about being Jewish from the essence of Judaism? And I don't know if that makes sense. And is being Jewish something that is needed globally right now? Or is being Christian, or is being any form, is the form what the world needs? Or is the essence really what the world needs? And what is the essence? And I know that's a lot of questions there, but that's why I came tonight, because I grapple with this all the time, and that's why I'm here, and I'm just trying to understand, like, what's the similarities, what's the difference, what's the essence, why be Jewish? Is it really healthy for the planet?
So I'm just going to do a little layer. I'm going to do layer number one, is that, and this is Christianity and Judaism. So Christianity began with a belief, the idea that Jesus Christ was a manifestation of God. Okay, if you believe, and on some very simplistic level, if you believe that, you're Christian. You can be Christian. You can be in the club. Judaism began as a people. We're a family. So, we believe very different things up here, but we're family. We're family. So to me, that's a really basic difference between Christianity and Judaism. One is centers around a particular idea, an idea, and the other is a family. That's Rabbi Harold Kushner from To Life, by the way.
This is Rabbi David Zeller. May his memory be a blessing. He was an important teacher of mine. Someone who also did a lot of journeying in his life in different traditions. And he used to tell a story about an encounter that he had with a Shinto priest. You remember him telling the story?
Yeah.
Who
was in New Mexico.
The Shinto priest or David Zeller?
No, both of them. That's where he met him.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So then help me if I get it, but I think this is what I remember from the story. Was that the Shinto priest said that every world religion had its role to play, and from his understanding of the tradition, the Jewish tradition was about bringing spirituality into the world in a manifest way. So I think that the goal, as I understand Jewish spirituality, is not transcendence. It's about manifesting the energy of the divine in everything in a physical way, which is the whole essence of saying a bracha, saying a blessing. Jamie talked about Heschel before. Heschel talks about every time we say a bracha, a blessing, it's an opportunity to turn an ordinary, mundane, daily activity into a spiritual adventure, right? The idea that there's blessings for, going to the bathroom, and Reb Gavriel also mentioned it earlier. It's like this idea that we imbue physical life with meaning and spirituality, and I think that, not that that's, you know, that's what he said though, right?
Sure. It's much better the way he told it.
No, it is, because I'm trying to keep to my
Get all these
time
parts
here. But no, I mean, Donizetti used to give characters to all of the people, for sure, but the point being is I'm not sure that I believe that there are other spiritual traditions that don't have that goal, but I do believe that that's a really important part of what Judaism gives to the world, you know. And I mean, I want to say something different, because Reb Zalman, who I spoke to yesterday, also has created a really important work about a sort of a hierarchy of avodah zarah, he calls it. Avodah zarah is the word that is usually translated as idolatry. Jamie mentioned idolatry before, and Yehdis mentioned idolatry, and the idea, you know, it's getting too complicated. I'm saying it because Reb Zalman actually wanted me to mention it. He said that, you know, and I don't know fully the system, but maybe you can help us. But my understanding of idolatry is not like, my sister, part of her marriage was in a Buddhist temple just outside Shanghai. And as a rabbinical student going to that wedding, I asked myself it was an incredible experience, a temple. There were tons of statues. And it was in that moment I came to the very clear conclusion, this is not idolatry. This is not what the Torah means by idolatry. There is no one in this space who actually, bowing down to those statues, thinks in any way that those statues are God. Those statues may influence or affect an experience of the divine, maybe create some kind of transcendent experience, but they are not themselves objects of God. And I think when the Torah talks about avodah zarah, whenever we make anything into God, then that's avodah zarah. But I don't believe at all that Buddhism, Hinduism, any of those religions are avodah zarah in that sense. So, and I think Reb Zalman has a kind of hierarchy, and I can't remember the order of things, but talks about how each of the different world religions are on the scale of avodah zarah. And I think it's an important part of this conversation, because there are many Jews who feel like any religion whatsoever, whether it's Christianity or any other religion, is a form of idolatry, and therefore it's completely forbidden in its essence. And I've increasingly don't believe that, even though you know, we've expressed, each of us, that sadness that the Jewish people don't find richness and meaning and spiritual depth in the Jewish tradition. But so that's a Eve.
I would like to add to what Marc said, that the chief rabbis of Israel a few years ago traveled to India and met with a Hindu leader, I don't know exactly in what hierarchy, but they agreed together and signed a document saying that they recognize each other religion as two religions that share something like, of course I can't quote, but something like that both religions recognize the supreme being as the creator, and they both believe in oneness. Which means that there was official recognition from the chief rabbinate in Israel that Hinduism is not avodah zarah, idolatry.
Goldfeder mentioned that.
And the Rambam.
When you asked your question, I wanted to just remind and announce that the name of one of Reb Zalman's more recent books, the publisher chose a name, and the name turned out to be
Judaism.
Yes, thank you. Jewish with feeling, because I always remember it by what he really wanted to call it, which was, if you're so universal, why be Jewish? Which is essentially what your question is. So I would like to recommend looking into that book, because that really was the question he was dealing with. But I also want to say about avodah zarah, which is translated as idolatry, but what's the literal translation?
Strange.
Alien worship, or alien service to God. Foreign or strange or alien. So when you really understand what it means and don't, because idolatry has taken on connotations of its own. What it's talking about is taking on a practice that lets you stop before the ultimate is reached. That gives you a face that you can stop at.
Yeah.
And so your worship or your spiritual opening is incomplete and is foreign to the practice. So imagine, I mean, he talks about Judaism as, he says it should be a verb. So when you were saying, Yehdis, how are you doing? He was talking to people about how much do you Jew, when do you Jew? It's a verb. And there is a difficulty when what you're doing and what you're maintaining in your mind do not match. When there's an unmatching. And I think that's the danger that we're dealing with when people are doing a lot of mixing and matching.
Right.
That the contradictions that aren't apparent on the surface, unless that happens to be your field, like everybody here. But if that's not apparent, you run into
Mismatch.
difficulties internally. You don't get where you'd like to go because things are not matching. I think that's the issue.
Thank you. Thank you.
I love having the last word. This is great. They're asking me to have the last word.
Tell them the truth about idolatry.
Right.
Just tell the truth.
Well,
Can I take one? I gotta give this saying is an amazing saying. In a few weeks, we're gonna read about the golden calf. So everybody says, how could the Jews make the golden calf? They just came out of Egypt, or worship the golden calf, whatever. So there's this great line. I don't know who said it, but the line is, don't look down on them so much. The people gave up all their gold for a god, but nowadays people give up God for gold.
Thank you.
try and follow that one. I'll try shock value. No, I just think. Forgive me if I'm. I don't know if judgmental is the right word. I guess I'm committed to my beliefs in a lot of ways, and maybe in some ways that people here would find to be offensive or off-putting, and I'm okay with that. But I think that why are you laughing?
Because I know you.
Okay. So nobody is to laugh most of the time. I just think that the idea that, like, at the core all the religions are one is a myth that's perpetuated by people who are unwilling or unable to commit to a certain path, and I think that comes out of that. And there's a sort of I think it's a fantasy that we have, like, at the core, and it's almost an insult to the people who design these religions. Like, the people put so much attention into, like, what do we do when we eat? What do we do before we go to sleep at night? How do we view making love? And to say, well, really at the core, they're all one, is a little bit of an insult to the thousands of years, collectively tens of thousands of years of tradition that have come into all of these traditions. You know, it's like Judaism has so much attention. Which shoe do you put on first, right? Which one do you tie first? Which, how do you enter a house? How do you start talking? How do you eat? Who blesses? This is like the richness of what we are and what we do. So to say, like, well, yeah, but it's all kind of one. Not really. I think when it comes, maybe there are common experiences among them. Like, there's experiences of that divine, the awe that we talked about. Maybe there is a common experience there, but I tend to think that it's a little bit of a myth. On the other hand, there's a great, everyone knows about Shammai and Hillel, that Shammai says you go from 8 candles to 1 candle, and Hillel goes from 1 candle to 8 candles. I shared this with Rabbi Josh and Rabbi Marc a while back. And Rav Kook says something brilliant. He says, Shammai was saying we all start off as different paths, and we're ultimately going to get to this one universal. So you go from 8 to 1, from the multiple to the 1. And Hillel says you start from 1 and you go to 8. We all start with that collective unified experience, whenever that was. But we celebrate our diversity. We celebrate the diversity of our practices and who we are and what we do individually as a people that can really be so brilliant.
This and this are the words of God.
Well, I don't know. It's an interesting question, because what Cook says about that statement, he says only if they love each other. So
what was the statement?
This and this are the words of the living God, meaning, but they have to have a relationship. It's an interesting point. But it's obviously there's tons of talk. We had 2 more questions we didn't even get to, and I don't think we've even opened up so many of the questions from the crowd here. But I do want to invite everyone. I'm sure some of the rabbis at least will be around here for a few minutes, taking advantage of those refreshments. So feel free to accost anyone or more of them that you can and ask the questions that they maybe didn't get to ask.
Do we get to know what those questions were?
The other 2, one of them was, what are the limits of interfaith dialogue? And the other one was, what non-Jewish book have you read that influenced your life the most? Those were the two.
Oh, that's a good
And do you actively,
We need a part two. Let's do a part two.
to other Jews?
We should do this
Right.
again.
And what?
Let's do it again.
What was that?
What did you
There
say?
again?
We need a part two.
Oh, part two of this conversation.
Maybe we will. Okay, stay tuned for that. Yeah. So I want to thank the City Club for making this possible. It's a great spot. They've been so easy to work with, and this is a really great and intimate spot where we can do conversations like this in a place that really feels warm. And the art is completely interesting, so feel free to peruse that. I want to thank Kara for being our mediator tonight. That was really good job. She kept us from fisticuffs the whole night. I think that was really cool. We sat in awe of you, afraid to violate that. I want to thank all the rabbis and leaders for participating here tonight. I think it's a wonderful. I want to give a shout out to the Soul Food team who did all the legwork for getting this together. That's making this. Yeah, so raise your hand if you're on the Soul Food team. Go ahead.
Raise your hand.
That's a lot of us, huh?
Thank you.
And I also want to just mention that we as a community decided a while back that it's really important that we do Shavuot together, that we celebrate the holiday of the receiving of the Torah together.
Well, finally.
Well, finally. So we're doing it this year on Shavuot night. What night is it? Whenever it is.
May 18th.
It's exactly 49 days after Passover. May 18th, is that what you said?
18th, yeah.
At the Rembrandt Yard, we're going to do it there, and then we're going to have a whole night of learning and nosh and praying together. It's a great spot. It's a great program. We want to thank AT Pomegranates for sponsoring that as well. So check our collective websites. You'll get information about that, I'm sure, from your respective...
Tell the website. Is it Boulder Chaver?
It's Boulder Chaver, our website, right?
Chaver.org.
Shh, one more second. It's boulderchaver.org has connections, has links to all of our websites, and has information about Shavuot on there, and it no longer has anti-Jewish and Israel propaganda, so we're excited about that. And thank you all for being a wonderful audience, asking great questions.